In the original Legends continuity pertaining to the ideas set forth by George Lucas, Anakin Skywalker was considerably weaker in the Force after his defeat on Mustafar. While Anakin originally had the potential to become a godlike being, one of the most powerful Force users in the universe, losing his remaining limbs and burning alive on Mustafar drastically diminished that. This is explicitly stated in several sources, which I'll go over. In the current new canon, this isn't necessarily the case, as Vader is still incredibly powerful during the reign of the Empire. The first piece I want to go over comes from an interview George did for Vanity Fair in 2005, in an article called Star Wars: The Last Battle, focused on the release of Revenge of the Sith. In the article, George says, Anakin, as Skywalker, as a human being, was going to be extremely powerful, but he ended up losing his arms and a leg and became partly a robot. So a lot of his ability to use the Force, a lot of his powers, are curbed at this point, because as a living form, there's not that much of him left. So his ability to be twice as good as the Emperor disappeared, and now he's maybe 20% less than the Emperor. So obviously, George's original vision for the story and the character had Anakin being much weaker due to the injuries he suffered. The next piece of information comes from the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, explaining Vader's feelings as he awoke inside his new armor and learned that Padme was dead. As Anakin realized that he had brought about the very thing he had tried so hard to prevent, he understood that everything was his own fault. He knew that when he finally could have saved Padme, the only thing he was thinking about was himself, and he had killed her by his own hand. As he was overcome with rage, screaming into the void, he reached out through the Force to crush Darth Sidious. He wanted revenge against his new master, who had destroyed the man that he once was. But he felt that he was so much less than he had once been. He was more than half machine, and he felt like a painter that had gone blind, or a composer that had gone deaf. He could remember the power he once held, and where it was, but that power was only a memory, and he could only manage to destroy the medical droids and their machinery with the Force. He wasn't even strong enough to touch Sidious. In the Legends novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Vader's thoughts and feelings about all of his injuries and the state of his powers are explained, as he questioned whether or not he became weaker after Mustafar. Vader felt as though he had been humbled by fate itself. While he retained his knowledge of the Jedi arts, he felt uncertain about his place in the Force, and while he had begun to awaken the power of the dark side through his training, he wasn't sure if he could sustain that power in his current state. His injuries had greatly weakened him, and his cybernetics limited and restrained his movement so much that he needed to call upon the Force just to walk. The devices of his armor made it difficult for him to move with ease, let alone grace. He was weighed down by it, greatly reducing his prowess in combat. After a surviving Jedi was able to injure his arm during a duel on Murkana, Vader was enraged to hear Anakin's voice in his head, questioning whether he had lost his power in the Force with his limbs. He pondered how, in the past, only Dooku, Asajj Ventress, and Obi-Wan had been skilled enough to injure him, so how had an undistinguished Jedi Knight been able to do so? Vader heard Anakin's voice, telling him that he was not as powerful as he once was. Vader cursed the Force itself, wondering what it had ever brought him besides pain. It tortured him with foresight, with visions he had been unable to prevent. It led him to believe that he possessed great power when he was really only a servant. Enraged at his supposed weakness, Vader promised himself that he would use the power of the dark side to render the Force a servant to him. Palpatine was aware of the limitations Vader experienced after his transformation into a cyborg, and an apprentice that was more machine than man was not what he had in mind for his new empire. However, he believed that if Vader was ever able to overcome his psychological limitations and accept the Dark Lord that he had become, he would regain his original potential in the Force and return to full power. Although Vader did move forward, learning the ways of the dark side and becoming a powerful Sith, he was never able to fully accept what he had done and who he had turned into, so he never regained his full potential. Vader then remained substantially weaker than the Jedi he had been as Anakin Skywalker.